Don't skip out on the family gathering. I don't care about your mother's funeral. Get here now.
I couldn't believe my ears hearing this during my mother's funeral. Family gathering? Don't skip out. Who in the world would abandon their own parents' funeral to attend their husband's family gathering? Moreover, it was strange that Daniel wasn't here in the first place. Realizing how shallow Daniel was, I felt anger boiling within me. Understood. I replied calmly, trying to maintain my composure. Fortunately, the ceremony was almost over. Mom, please wait for me a little longer. Ideally, I wouldn't want to leave my mother's side even for a moment, but I couldn't let Daniel do whatever he wanted any longer. After the funeral ended and during the lunch break with my relatives, I spoke to my father. Dad, I'm going to see Daniel for a bit. I'll be back soon, so don't worry. He seemed to understand and nodded. I clenched my hands tightly and rushed out of the hall in my morning clothes. My name is Julie Johnson. I'm 30 years old and I work at a call center. I recently started dating someone and we've been together for 6 months. His name is Daniel Smith. He's 5 years older than me and works as a government employee at the city hall. Daniel's gentle, droopy eyes and kind face make him seem perfectly suited for his jobs. He commutes to the city hall from his family home. Daniel's family home is in a rural area, far from the urban parts of the state, and he drives there from his home. We initially met in Daniel's hometown while I was out taking photos, which is a hobby of mine. Since I rarely visit that area, I got lost when the sun set and needed help finding my way.
Do you need any help?
A car approached, the window rolled down, and it was Daniel asking. Surprised, I told him I was lost and lacked direction. With his kind face, I immediately felt he was a good person.
The nearest station is quite far from here. Would you like a ride?
Oh, but it was probably not a good idea to get into a stranger's car. But Daniel took his employee ID from his wallet, showing that he was a government worker.
I'm a government employee, but you don't have to get in if you're uncomfortable.
He was considerate, allowing me to choose what to do next. I hesitated for a moment, but according to him, walking to the station would take over 30 minutes. It was already dark, and I didn't have the energy to walk there alone. Well, in that case, I'll take you up on your offer. And so, I got into Daniel's car. As I initially thought, Daniel was also a gentle and calm man in conversation. After safely dropping me off at the station, Daniel shyly asked for my contact information. If it had been another guy, I wouldn't have given my contact information so quickly, but seeing Daniel's character, I felt it was okay to exchange numbers. After that, we went on a few dates, and 3 months after meeting, Daniel confessed his feelings, and we started dating. Even after we began our relationship, I felt things were going smoothly. Daniel seemed to have a constant sense of calm, perhaps because he had a stable job as a government employee. Being 5 years older than me, his relaxed attitude put me at ease. Even though I wasn't good at relationships, I started to feel that I would be happy having a peaceful relationship with Daniel. It's been almost 6 months since we started dating, and just the other day, Daniel proposed to me.
I can't imagine marrying anyone but you. If you're willing to accept, you'll have to move to my family's place. But would that be okay?
Daniel said gently, as he always does. Daniel's father is a farmer, so on his days off, he helps with the farming. That's why he wanted to live near his family home even after getting married. I hesitated a bit. The reason was that my mother is ill, and the doctors have told me she might not have much time left. The hospital where my mother is admitted is in the city where I currently live, so if I move to Daniel's family home, I won't be able to visit my mother as quickly as I do now. However, I also strongly desired to report my marriage to my mother soon and give her peace of mind. My mother has always worried about my future, and now that I'm 30, I have started to think that marrying Daniel would be the best way to reassure her. After thinking it over for a while, I realized I had no complaints about marrying Daniel, so I answered him, "Yes, I'd be happy to." At that time, I was so overjoyed at the prospect of marrying Daniel that I thought even if I lived near his family home, I could still visit my mother if I took the time. Looking back now, this decision was a big mistake, but at that moment, swept up in the excitement of the proposal, I was completely blind. In hindsight, my choice at the time was a big mistake, but I was utterly blindsided by the heat of the proposal. Daniel brought his parents, Mary and Robert, and we met at the hospital.
Daniel is finally getting married. I've been looking forward to meeting his bride. Daniel can't do anything himself, so I'm glad he found a capable wife.
Stop it, Mom. That's embarrassing.
Mary seemed very happy about our marriage, probably because she had been a bit anxious that Daniel wasn't married yet. She chatted with a big smile the entire time. Mary talked a lot, and my father and mother just kept nodding in response. Robert, on the other hand, was not very talkative, and Mary mostly dominated the meeting. Sometimes Daniel would tease Mary, and I felt they had a close relationship.
Well, Julie, you'll have to do your best, so please take care of everything.
Mary's sticky tone at the end made me feel a bit uneasy. Do my best. What exactly does she expect me to do? I had doubts but couldn't ask further, and the meeting ended. After marrying Daniel as planned, we started living near his family home. We moved into a small apartment 10 minutes from Daniel's family home. I didn't want to live with his parents, so I was relieved we had a place. On the first day we moved into the apartment, the doorbell rang. I wondered if it was some solicitation already, but when I opened the door, Mary was standing there.
Oh, Julie, may I take a look around your new place?
Well, sure.
Come on in, Mom.
I hadn't heard from Daniel that Mary would come, but he seemed to know and eagerly welcomed her.
Well, it's a bit small, but pretty nice. Since Julie will be doing the housework, keep the kitchen and bathroom clean, or they'll get dirty quickly. I hear young people don't open the windows these days, so you must ventilate regularly. Mold can grow, and Daniel's health could suffer. Also, come help with our farming on weekends. Daniel is tired from work, so you need to work hard. And don't make the food too salty. Daniel could get high blood pressure.
Mary rattled off her instructions rapidly. Although her tone was gentle, an undeniable pressure didn't allow me to say no. I was naturally surprised, as I never expected Mary to advise me about managing our home. Moreover, everything she said centered on Daniel being tired or his health being affected. It's understandable that she loves her son, but is it right to tell me all this, who just married into the family? With all due respect, Mary, I also work at a call center during the day. So I'll be coming home around the same time as Daniel, and we should share the housework. Of course, I'll do what I can, but the matters of our household will be decided by the two of us. At that time, I didn't yet know how terrifying Mary could be, so I could confidently express my opinion. Hearing my rebuttal, Mary froze momentarily, but I could see her expression quickly change to anger.
What are you talking about? Is working at a call center busier than being a government employee? That's not true. Don't think you're on the same level as Daniel when you hardly do any work. Besides, housework has always been a woman's job. That's what marriage is.
I was shocked. I felt deeply uncomfortable as Mary imposed her old fashioned values on me and defended Daniel. I looked at Daniel for help. He looked uneasy and spoke up.
Come on, Mom. Give it a rest. Julie didn't mean any harm, right?
Yes, that's true. I reluctantly nodded, and Mary turned on her heel and left the house, looking displeased. I had hoped Daniel would stand up to Mary more firmly, but I was disappointed that he only defended me half heartedly. After Mary left, I asked Daniel, "Is Mary always like that?" I was surprised by how she imposed her old fashioned values on me. I sighed as I spoke, and Daniel looked puzzled.
Old-fashioned values? I actually agree with my mom. I want you to do most of the housework. I'll help with the farming. But since I do a lot of physical work as a government employee, I'd like to rest on weekends. You agreed to this when we married, so it should be fine, right? And please don't speak badly about my mom. It hurts me.
I was speechless at Daniel's assertion. What is he talking about? I knew we would live near his family home, but I only agreed to do some housework. As for farming, he mentioned that he only helped occasionally. But now, it's clear that's not the case. Mary seems to adore Daniel endlessly, and Daniel loves Mary just as much. At 35, Daniel was what you would call a mama's boy. From then on, I was exasperated by the numerous things Daniel and Mary did and said. Mary often came over without any reason.
Today, Daniel told me he's tired, so make him his favorite mac and cheese. Oh, by the way, Daniel wants to go on a trip next weekend, so we'll be going together. Julie, take care of the house and the farm. Don't slack off.
Mary made these demands without considering me. Why does Daniel rarely contact me but only tell Mary that he is tired, wants to go on a trip, and so on? It's as if she is the wife and I am the housekeeper. My dissatisfaction grew, and I deeply regretted marrying Daniel. On the weekend, Mary and Daniel went on their trip. I visited my mother and then headed to Daniel's family home. It was to help Robert with the farming. Since Mary and Daniel were out having fun, I thought it was strange to be helping at his family home by myself, but I didn't want to give Mary any reason to criticize me for slacking off. Besides, Robert was a good person and I genuinely wanted to help him.
Really, those two going on a trip and leaving you to help out alone? What are they thinking? I'm truly sorry.
Robert seemed exasperated by Mary and Daniel's selfishness. He sincerely apologized to me as well. "No, it's fine. I like helping you, Robert."
Is that so? How is your mother doing?
It doesn't seem like her condition is improving. She might not have much time left. I didn't want to say more, so I looked down.
Julie,
Robert looked at me intently as if he had something to say. but he showed signs of hesitation, unsure if he should tell me now. Is something wrong? Knowing that Robert could have been more talkative, I thought he might be struggling to start the conversation, so I encouraged him to continue.
Actually, there's something I need to tell you.
Robert began to speak heavily.
That's the situation.
After hearing Robert's story, I was speechless. No way. This can't be true.
I'm afraid it is. I can't express how sorry I am, especially since you've just married.
Robert, looking genuinely remorseful, apologized sincerely. It's not your fault, Robert. Please don't apologize. Even as I said that to him, I couldn't fully grasp the reality of what he had just told me. What should I do now? If what Robert said was true, I needed to rethink my future. I stared at Robert, deep in thought.
I want you to do whatever feels right for you. I'll support you in any way I can.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Though I said that, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert's revelation after returning home that night. I kept wondering what I should do and how to deal with Mary and Daniel when they returned from their trip. My mother passed away a month later. The doctors had told us she didn't have much time left, so it wasn't a shock, but for my father and me, who had hoped she would live as long as possible, it was the most devastating event of our lives. Tomorrow is my mother's funeral.
Got it.
I told Daniel with a heavy heart, and he responded. Daniel had been coming home later than usual lately, seeming busier than before. That day, Mary came to our house again. I thought she might offer her condolences, but instead, she looked at me and insulted me.
What's with that puffy face? It's embarrassing to look like that after your mother has passed.
My face was puffy from all the crying I had done since my mother passed away. Yet Mary didn't offer a single word of sympathy and instead made a nasty, insulting comment. Moreover, Mary's face seemed somewhat pleased. Anger surged within me towards Mary, but I didn't have the energy to confront her. The next day, Saturday, my mother's funeral was to be held near my family home. I left the house earlier than Daniel and met with my father to discuss the funeral arrangements. Since my father was the chief mourner, he had many responsibilities and seemed very busy. I stood by his side, helping him. Other relatives began to gather, greeting my father and me. All of them were visibly saddened by the untimely passing of my mother. As my relatives and the attendees from my side were gathering, I noticed that Daniel and Mary were still not there. Robert had arrived long ago and was already seated. What's going on? Daniel said he needed some time to prepare, but could it take this long? Cornered with no way to escape, Mary started trembling. Eventually, the funeral began, but Daniel and Mary never showed up. During the ceremony, my phone vibrated in my pocket from an incoming call. I initially ignored it, but the calls kept coming, so I found a moment to step out. When I checked the caller ID outside the hall, I saw it was Daniel. Worried that they might have had an accident on their way to the funeral, I answered the call with a strange sense of foreboding. Hello, Daniel. Where are you right now? When I asked in a subdued voice, Daniel didn't answer my question, but suddenly shouted.
Don't skip out on the family gathering. I don't care about your mother's funeral. Get here now.
I couldn't believe my ears hearing this during my mother's funeral. I was so shocked by Daniel's harsh tone and words, something I'd never heard from him before. that I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a moment. Family gathering? Don't skip out. Who in the world would abandon their own parents' funeral to attend their husband's family gathering? Moreover, it was strange that Daniel wasn't here in the first place. Realizing how shallow Daniel was, I felt anger boiling within me. Understood, I replied calmly, trying to maintain my composure. Fortunately, the ceremony was almost over. Mom, please wait for me a little longer. Ideally, I wouldn't want to leave my mother's side even for a moment, but I couldn't let Daniel do whatever he wanted any longer. After the funeral ended and during the lunch break with my relatives, I spoke to my father. Dad, I'm going to see Daniel for a bit. I'll be back soon, so don't worry. He seemed to understand and nodded. I clenched my hands tightly and rushed out of the hall in my morning clothes. Robert and I rushed to the venue where Mary's relatives were gathering. Hearing my conversation with Daniel, Robert probably had some things he wanted to say to both of them too. Daniel mentioned that the venue was Mary's sister's house. When we arrived, I rang the doorbell.
Come in.
Daniel ordered me in a commanding tone, which surprised me. I exchanged a glance with Robert and then appeared before Mary and Daniel. I'm terribly sorry for being late. As soon as I apologized, Mary's relatives looked startled as they glanced between Robert and me.
Julie, why are you still in your morning clothes? This is a family gathering. You should have come in something more casual.
Daniel, who had started speaking more rudely, was taken aback by my attire. That was understandable. They couldn't have imagined that Robert and I would show up in our morning clothes without changing. Oh, I'm sorry. I was informed suddenly and didn't have time to change. Today was my mother's funeral, and you were getting ready for it this morning too, remember? I never expected there to be a gathering like this. As I spoke calmly, the relatives exchanged glances.
Your mother's funeral? Why aren't Daniel and Mary attending?
Mary's relatives seemed unaware that my mother had passed away and that the funeral was taking place. Mary and Daniel were looking at each other awkwardly. These two had skipped my mother's funeral without saying anything to the relatives and were casually enjoying a trivial family gathering. Even thinking about it calmly made me very angry.
Oh dear, Julie, did your mother pass away? Why didn't you tell us? If I had known, I would have attended the funeral.
Mary pretended to be troubled, acting as if she knew nothing. But lying is useless. I took my phone out of my pocket and showed everyone the messages in our family group chat. Oh, there's no way you didn't know. Look, I sent a message here. My mother has passed away. All three of you read it. Mary, you saw this message, didn't you? I held my phone screen up in front of Mary's face as if to say that evidence speaks louder than words. I could see the relatives staring at Mary and Daniel with cold eyes. Cornered with no way to escape, Mary started trembling. Apparently, she was furious.
Shut up. Are you trying to complain to me with these sneaky tricks? Do you enjoy bullying me? After all, I let you marry my precious Daniel, yet you're bold.
Finally showing her true colors, Mary yelled as if everything was my fault. But hearing her words, the relatives were taken aback by her outburst. It is evident to everyone who the real culprit was. I'll return those words right back to you. Mary and Daniel, who skipped my mother's funeral to waste time here, seem to have no hearts. From the outside, it was clear that my eyes were burning with anger. Since I usually didn't show much emotion, Daniel was shocked and wide eyed.
That's a horrible thing to say. It was just a moment of weakness. I wouldn't normally do this. I thought something might be important at my mom's relatives' gathering.
Daniel started making desperate excuses. No matter how important it was, is there anything more important than your wife's mother's funeral? Even if there was, the least you could do is inform me beforehand. That's basic manners, isn't it? With neither Mary nor Daniel showing any signs of apologizing, my frustration was about to explode.
My phone died. I tried to contact you.
Daniel kept piling on excuses, but his elementary level justifications gave me a headache. I realized that if I continued to argue with Mary and Daniel, the conversation would go nowhere. At that moment, Robert stepped forward and spoke.
I've been listening to this, and you two are making no sense. It's disrespectful to Julie's mother. Apologize.
Robert said heavily to both of them. But neither Mary nor Daniel moved a muscle at his words. Seeing this as a final warning, Robert sighed deeply and opened the voice recorder on his phone.
If you don't apologize, I'll play this recording here.
Mary and Daniel exchanged puzzled looks. I gulped, knowing what would be played from Robert's recording.
Julie's mother doesn't have much time left, right?
Yeah. From what Julie says, she's frail. I visit her sometimes too, and she's so thin, always hooked up to tubes.
Oh, so it's almost time then? I'm excited. We'll get a lot of inheritance and insurance money. Make sure you take good care of me.
Of course, Mom. I'll do anything for you.
What came from Robert's phone was an unbelievable conversation between Daniel and Mary about my mother's condition. And it continued.
But to ensure we get all the inheritance and insurance money, Julie and her father are in the way. The beneficiaries are Julie and her father, right? Since you're married, Julie's share would be yours, but that's only half.
Yeah, that's true. What are you planning, Mom?
It's obvious. If those two were out of the picture,
Oh, Mom, you're scary.
They laughed as if it was a joke, but didn't sound like one. The relatives were also wide eyed, staring at Mary and Daniel. When I visited Daniel's family home a month ago, Robert told me about this. He went to the bathroom late at night and overheard Mary and Daniel discussing this dangerous plan in the living room. He quickly recorded it with the voice recorder and kept it as evidence in case something happened. Knowing that Daniel had betrayed me and conspired with Mary to go after my mother's money made me tremble uncontrollably. I couldn't believe that Daniel, who had seemed so kind and perfect as a husband, was capable of such a scheme. From that day on, I was filled with doubt about him. Mary and Daniel started trembling after hearing the recording. They realized they had no escape.
what is this? It's nonsense. Stop playing tricks on me.
Mary shouted, but no one believed her anymore. While a video could be faked, a voice recording with such realism was beyond what Robert or I could fabricate. Daniel hung his head in defeat. After playing the recording, Robert, his face red with anger, spoke.
After hearing this conversation and Julie's testimony, it's clear that you two are terrible people. Not only did you skip Julie's mother's funeral, but you also plan to harm Julie and her father to get the money. Apologize to Julie right now.
Since Robert was usually a man of few words and spoke with such intense fury, Mary and Daniel were trembling.
I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I just wanted to live happily with my mom.
I just made a mistake because I care about Daniel so much.
As the two of them made excuses, Robert's patience finally snapped.
Really? You two don't seem to feel any remorse at all. I'm divorcing you, Mary. It isn't very comfortable to be associated with people like you two. Julie, what will you do?
When the word divorce came out of Robert's mouth, Mary and Daniel's eyes widened in shock. Yes, of course, I'll divorce him too. And I'll make sure to get alimony. Thank you. I met Robert's eyes and nodded firmly. Robert and I had intended to divorce Mary and Daniel from the start. We were waiting for the right moment, and today provided a sufficient reason to bring it up.
Divorce. What are you talking about?
Daniel was shocked, but Mary, facing a late life divorce, was visibly shaken by Robert's decision.
No, I've been a housewife since we got married. How am I supposed to live now?
Mary pleaded with Robert, looking at him desperately, but he snorted and said,
That's not my problem. You can have your precious Daniel take care of you.
Robert dismissed her coldly. Mary was utterly devastated and unable to respond.
Do we really have to get divorced too? I was brainwashed by my mother. I love you, Julie. Besides, wouldn't life be tough for you without me? So,
For some reason, Daniel seemed to think I couldn't live alone without him. I glared at him and said, Sorry to disappoint you, but I can live perfectly without you. I was living just fine before we got married. Please don't flatter yourself into thinking I can't manage without you. And besides, I'll be getting plenty of alimony from you. With my final words, Daniel slumped in defeat. Let's go. I exchanged a glance with Robert and we left the house. After that, we headed back to my mother's funeral. A few days later, I divorced Daniel, just as I had declared. Since our marriage had lasted less than a year, Daniel, worried about appearances, clung to me.
just a little longer. Let's at least stay married for another year.
Realizing that he wasn't speaking out of love, but out of concern for his image, I dismissed his plea without hesitation. Unlike his overbearing attitude at my mother's funeral, Daniel reverted to a timid personality. He seemed like a man with a split personality. I realized that I had been deceived by him in many ways. Of course, I received alimony from Daniel. The shock of our divorce took a toll on him, and he lost motivation at work, eventually taking a few months of leave. Robert and Mary were in the midst of divorce proceedings, and Mary was mentally strained, so Daniel couldn't rely on his beloved mother, Mary, and ended up isolating himself at home. Moreover, news of what Daniel and Mary had done spread everywhere since it was a small town. The community shunned them and found it challenging to stay in their hometown. Ultimately, they were driven out of town and now live without connections. I hear Mary is now living with Daniel, but I wonder how they will manage together. If Daniel had paid attention to me and cared for my mother, we could have had a happy marriage. This is their own doing. If Daniel doesn't regain his motivation, he'll probably quit his job eventually. I hope he manages to endure his lonely single life. I vowed never to get involved with a man like Daniel again. Someone who appears kind on the outside but prioritizes his own mother above all else. I moved away from Daniel's hometown and started living in an apartment near my workplace again. This is where I feel most at ease. Living near this bustling city suits me much better than in some unfamiliar rural area. I still keep in touch with Robert, who updates me on the progress of his divorce proceedings. The divorce will be finalized soon, and I plan to visit him once it is. Although Robert is no longer my father-in-law, we share a bond through our shared pain. We can continue to be friends. In a place without Daniel, I will live each day to the fullest, honoring my late mother's memory.